Hello again. Following the attack in Hainault by a man armed with a sword on Tuesday, I made a rash prediction on this channel, to the effect that when his name was revealed it would not be a traditional English name such as David Smith or Robert Jones. I tentatively guessed that he would be from Eastern Europe or the Middle East, but in fact he was Brazilian. One thing was certain, and that was that he would not have an ordinary English name. There are two interesting points to be made about the business in Hainault. The first is, of course, that I was not possessed either by some supernatural premonition regarding the identity of the attacker, and nor was my prediction an indication that I am a fanatical white supremacist or Little Englander. I will venture to suggest that not a single person hearing about the nature of the rampage in Hainault expected to hear that the culprit was British. The strange and alarming thing is, though, that at the same time, hardly anybody would dare these days to voice that belief out loud in public, say at their place of work. This is because not only would one get some very disapproving looks, it is the kind of thing these days which could actually cost you your job. I invite viewers to imagine saying at work when discussion turned to the events in Hainault, "I bet that guy turns out to be a foreigner with a weird and unpronounceable name." I suspect that few people would be willing to take a risk like that in this present febrile atmosphere where matters of ethnicity and nationality are concerned. This, when you stop and think about it, is a simply extraordinary state of affairs. Here is something which everybody in the country knows, or at least believes, but nobody dares to say it out loud. It would be bad enough if the consequences of such frankness were merely social disapproval, but as I say, it's the kind of thing which can cost you your job. Try saying it if you work for the NHS or social services, or in a school, the police force, practically anywhere in fact, and just wait for the accusations of racism to start flying and the disciplinary actions to begin. The truth is now so dangerous that it can never be spoken of openly. Of course, I have no employer, so I feel free to talk about such things. But even for me, there are hazards. Attempts are regularly made to get YouTube to close down this channel, and it will be recalled that a couple of months ago, 3 people who used to comment here regularly and complain to YouTube about what I say here came up with a scheme to damage the standing of my Substack account, where I publish various stuff I've written. It was claimed that some of this material had been put through plagiarism software and found to be cut and pasted from other sources, supposedly right-wing American websites. There wasn't a word of truth in it, of course, but the aim was to harm me and damage my livelihood. You see, this is what happens to anybody now who starts saying the kind of things that we all privately think. That then is the first point, that in modern Britain one must not speak plainly about even something as obvious as the nationality of a murderer, and if you do, then there will be bad consequences for you. I regard this as the most undesirable state of affairs. The second point I want to make is this. The crime in Hainault and its aftermath is worth examining for what it tells us about England today. In an effort to discourage or prevent such reflections, there are those who assert that we should simply focus on what a tragedy this is and to grieve for the death of a schoolboy who was killed. I don't agree with that perspective. I think that we need to ask ourselves why such crimes take place and see if we can prevent this kind of thing happening in the future. Surely that's a worthwhile enough enterprise. If we do wish to stop this happening again, then we must at the very least be prepared to ask why it happened. In the description to this video, I give a link to the BBC report on the matter, where we are told that a Brazilian called Marcus Aurelio Arduini Monzo has been charged with the murder of a Nigerian called Daniel Anjorin. This announcement was made by the Chief Crown Prosecutor of the Crown Prosecution Service. She is an Indian woman called Jaswant Nawal. So used are we to this kind of thing that we rather take it for granted these days, but it is, when you stop and think about it, more than a little strange. 30 years ago, Hainault was an utterly dull and completely quiet, wholly white district on the edge of London. On April the 3rd, a teenager was shot in the street there, and then a few weeks later, this happens. I'm going to ask a simple question. Forget about whether you approve or disapprove of things like unrestricted immigration for a moment. I'm talking now simply of a possible association. Does anybody think that there is an association between the massively increased diversity of an area like Hainault and the occurrence of such a bizarre crime as this? Do they think that this kind of thing happened in that district before it became so multicultural? Is it purely coincidental that this was a homicide involving a Brazilian and a Nigerian? Is this kind of thing taking place more often these days because of this diversity, or is the diversity simply an irrelevant factor in the equation? Does the fact that the man charged is Brazilian have any bearing on this? The homicide rate in Brazil is 20 times higher than in Britain. Does that mean that there could be a cultural connection with this crime? Bancroft School in Woodford was the school attended by the boy who was killed on Tuesday. By curious coincidence, Grace O'Malley Kumar, who was murdered in the Nottingham stabbing rampage, was also a pupil at Bancroft's. She was killed by another foreigner on a rampage. Is there something worth examining in these events? Of course, there will be those who reject any suggestion that this is worth talking about, and who will claim that we should just not think too deeply about what is being seen. But I'm far from convinced that they are right about this. If we wish to end such dreadful crimes, then we must think deeply about them and see if there are common factors and a way perhaps to prevent such things in the future. As usual, in the description to this video, I give a few links about what I've been talking.